The story begins with the MC suddenly floating in an endless void. He realizes that he is being summoned by a mysterious goddess and initially thinks it might be a fresh start. That excitement vanishes when he realizes he's been summoned alongside the people he hates most, a fact the goddess seems fully aware of. Then everything fades away. When light touches his eyelids again, his first thought is that he must have fallen asleep outside somewhere. That idea falls apart the moment he opens his eyes and sits up. Instead of his room, he finds trees in every direction, a forest. The sight alone leaves him stunned, and the confusion only grows from there. Why is he here? Is this actually another world? As if things weren't strange enough, he hears his own voice and freezes. It doesn't sound like his voice at all. Looking down only makes it worse. His school uniform is gone, replaced by clothing he's never seen before. Frustration starts crowding out confusion as he grabs his head, trying to make sense of it. Becoming someone else sounds ridiculous, but nothing about today feels normal. Once he calms down, he sorts through his memories. The void, the goddess, standing there with the others. Then something clicks. While everyone else stayed quiet, he'd been the only one to speak up, not against being summoned, just against being sent there with those particular people. The memory hits him hard. He looks up at the sky as the realization forms. He's alone. The others are nowhere in sight. His complaint may have actually worked. This looks less like a group summoning now and more like the start of a reincarnation story. With part of the mystery solved, he checks his appearance next. A nearby lake gives him the answer, and the reflection staring back leaves him speechless. This is not a normal reincarnation. His body looks far softer and more delicate than before, making him mistake himself for a girl at first. A closer look confirms he's still male, though the confusion remains. He finally notices the backpack around. For once, his luck improves. Inside, food, basic supplies, and a pouch of coins. Not a fortune, but far better than being stranded with nothing. As he checks further, a glowing window appears before his eyes. He accepts it almost without thinking, since a floating screen barely registers as strange anymore today. It turns out to be an item box, and the contents look pulled straight from a fantasy game. A sword, a shield, armor, and a few potions, all neatly stored. Naturally, he checks his status next, and it's a letdown. Job, Traveler, Level 1. Not the start he'd hoped for. His unique skills make it worse. Detailed appraisal and minor item box. That's the whole list. No legendary power, no broken combat skill, nothing to carry him through trouble. Just information and storage. He sighs, then reminds himself knowledge isn't useless. In an unfamiliar world, information might matter more than raw strength. He spends the rest of the day testing appraisal on everything around him. Most results are unremarkable, but a few things stick. The item box has a quick equip function. Strength ties more to job than level, while skills grow through repeated use. The whole system feels like an unusually detailed role-playing game. One risky thought crosses his mind. If this world runs like a game, what happens after death? Common sense wins before curiosity can take the wheel. Some experiments aren't worth running. As darkness creeps through the forest, he decides to move. Staying out past sunset sounds like a fast way to become monster food. Following the river, he sees a bridge that connects to a proper road. For the first time all day, it feels like progress. Soon, a carriage appears in the distance. The relief turns to amazement once his eyes reach the driver. An elf sits atop the carriage, ears unmistakably pointed. Behind her sits a girl with cat ears and a swishing tail, a beast woman. He freezes on the roadside as it sinks in. This is really another world. The carriage speeds off. He tries to chase it for a few seconds before his stamina gives out, leaving him gasping in the empty road. He knows he's blown it badly, but confirming that fantasy races really exist is enough reason to keep going. Later, he spots the same carriage again, stopping up ahead. Something about the stillness feels off. As he gets closer, he finds out why. The cat-eared girl's ears snap flat, and she shouts a warning half a second before bandits break from the trees on both sides. The elf, clearly in charge, barks orders and draws her blade. Both women fight with sharp, practiced skill, but the numbers aren't close. The bandit leader orders his men to grab the cargo and take the women alive. Our guy watches from the roadside, stomach dropping. He's level 1, no training, no plan. The smart move is to stay put. But his body moves before his brain finishes the thought. He charges the bandit leader, greatsword raised, swings wide, trips over his own feet, and the blade, 3 sizes too heavy for him, carries clean through the man on the way down. He hits the dirt. The bandit doesn't get up. Everyone stares at him. He stares at his sword. The elf takes the opening and defeats the rest with a single arc of wind magic. Then it's over, except for one furious straggler charging him for eliminating his boss. The man closes fast. Somehow Toy's sword catches him across the stomach before he's even registered swinging it. He shoves the body off, fights down the urge to be sick, and stands there shaking. his face soaked in someone else's blood. He's eliminated 2 people, and he'd have been the one on the ground if he hadn't moved. This world hands out life and death without ceremony, and only now does that truth fully land. Once the dust settles, the elf walks over and thanks him directly. She says he changed the outcome of the fight, and their injuries are minor. She introduces herself as Luanatha, leader of the caravan. He introduces himself as Toy. He's reshaped his old name, Fuji, into something that fits this world better. Luanatha doesn't comment on it. Instead, she points toward the river and suggests washing up before meeting the caravan master. It sounds reasonable, but her idea of washing up means going straight into the river and expecting him to do the same without explanation. She leans in with a smirk and tells him he could pass as a girl if needed, adding that traveling disguised as a boy is probably safer. Then she quickly hands him spare clothes and cheerfully notes he still has room to grow. Toy manages an embarrassed smile and says nothing. Correcting her feels like too much trouble, and actually, "I'm a boy" gets harder to say the longer he stands there in the unfamiliar situation. By the time they're done, he's lost an argument he never even got to have. After the bath, he meets Gortio, the caravan master, sharp-dressed and quick to warm to him, who offers a ride to Kernifi, a city built entirely around a dungeon. Gortio explains on the way, the Baldark Labyrinth sits at the city's center and draws adventurers seeking treasure and rare drops. His trading company operates out of Kernifi, and anyone who wants to explore must first register with the Adventurers Guild. Dungeon diving is dangerous, so small parties are standard, and trust between members matters most. For those without companions, there is the option of hiring a contracted worker, which Gortio calls a slave before quickly clarifying there are strict legal protections against abuse. Before Toy can process that, Gortio produces a flat record card taken from the bandit leader, listing his name, job history, and criminal record, exchangeable for coin at any government office. Toy stares at it, struck by how easily a life folds down into something you can hand across a counter. Gortio then offers a coin pouch as a reward from the caravan. Toy tries to refuse since his body had moved on its own, but Gortio waves it off, calls him too kind for his own good, and adds that refusing would reflect badly on the company. Toy takes the money. Kernifi comes into view soon after, dense, loud, humming with dungeon commerce. Gortio, who seems to have adopted him on the spot, recommends an inn and pays for a month's lodging before Toy can object. Alone in his room, Toy finally breathes. He's exhausted down to the bone and wants nothing but a bed, but his clothes reek from the fight, so he drags himself downstairs for a bucket. The innkeeper had already explained the basics. No plumbing. Water magic stones provide running water in this world. There's no soap. Baths are mostly for nobles. Toilets are pit holes with buckets, and paper is too expensive, so leaves are used instead. He'd braced for rough living. He scrubs his clothes as best he can, then checks his funds. Between the 100,000 yen the goddess gave him and Gortio's reward, his appraisal puts the total at around 6 million yen. His eyes widen for a few seconds before he reins himself in, since money like that vanishes fast without discipline. Clothes tomorrow. Gear after that. Then the dungeon. His thoughts drift, uninvited, to his old classmates, somewhere in this world right now, probably. One face surfaces and brings a tightness in his chest he doesn't want to feel here. He pushes it down. He's Toy now. That name, that face, whoever he used to be, all of it stays behind him. He presses a fist against his knee and makes up his mind, solo. He'll take this world on by himself. The resolve lasts about 30 seconds before his body gives out. His eyes drop shut mid-thought, and a notification about a job change opens in his status window, one he's already too far gone to read. His hand drifts across the screen as he sleeps, and his finger lands, without his knowing, on an option that reads Reincarnated Hero. It hovers there, one tap away. Meanwhile, in the capital of Margus, Princess Elmelda stands rigid while an aide delivers the summoning results like he's defusing a bomb. 34 people summoned, 4 marked as heroes, 3 of those 4 with criminal records. She makes him repeat it twice, then demands to know what went wrong. Elsewhere in the same palace, a girl in uniform moves fast through the halls, checking every corner. Fuji is missing, a classmate who was right there until the very last moment, and then simply wasn't. In the capital, things aren't going smoothly. One of the summoned boys gets right in the princess's face, done with being talked down to. He makes it clear he doesn't care about her title, her crown, or her opinion of his character. She dragged him to another world without asking, called him a criminal, and now admits she has no way of sending any of them back. He isn't standing quietly through a lecture. The princess lets him finish. She exhales slowly, like someone who's rehearsed this exact conversation, then lays out the situation plainly. The kingdom faces the early signs of a massive monster outbreak, the kind that floods out of dungeons across several regions and flattens everything within a few years. The only known way to stop it is to clear the 10th floor of those dungeons and defeat a set number of monsters. She isn't demanding. She begs them, offering the full support of the castle, noble status once the mission is complete, and a sworn promise to help them return home afterward. The room goes quiet as they process the idea of becoming nobles. Hayate breaks the silence, saying flatly that they don't really have a choice anyway. Doi sighs and says he doesn't care what it's called. They should just get it over with. The bespectacled aide explains that, before anything else, they'll spend the first month in training to learn about the world and build basic combat, magic skills for their own safety. That plan lasts about 4 seconds. Akaba, already eager to test his new power, tells him to shut up and says they'll do things their own way. The princess's guard draws his sword and steps forward. She stops him with a quiet word. Then she tells the group fine, if they want to dive straight into a dungeon, she'll let them form their own party and go. Gear provided. No more arguments. The guard looks at her like she's lost her mind. She tells him it's better than having them take their anger out on the castle. They're already debating whether they can start the next morning when a girl's voice cuts through the noise. It's Sayaka, asking the princess directly about a missing person. There was supposed to be one more, someone who should have been in that group. Does anyone know what happened to him? The princess apologizes and explains that the number of people summoned was never predetermined, and they only confirmed 34 arrivals. Sayaka goes quiet, lowers her head, and says she understands. She looks around the room at everyone bickering and making plans, and realizes not one of them seems to notice or care that Toy isn't there. She thinks about that for a moment. Back then, Yuji had always ended up on the receiving end of things, and she'd never managed to talk to him properly. But somewhere in this world, he's alone, possibly struggling, and worrying without acting won't help either of them. She slaps herself lightly, decides to adapt to this world first, then go find him herself, and clings to that plan like a promise. On the other side of the city, in a much quieter inn room, Toy wakes up, blinks at the ceiling, and yawns. Day 2 in another world. He has a vague memory of seeing some kind of screen before falling asleep, but he can't quite pull the details back. He drags himself to the mirror and stares at his reflection, accepting with resigned practicality that sleeping changed nothing. He's still here, still in this body, still himself in every way that matters. Mentally, he's 18, sharp as ever, and if he plays it right, he can probably pass for younger without drawing attention. He gets dressed and stands there, thinking it over properly. He's been reincarnated, a fresh start, a new identity, a new life. Framed that way, there's something freeing about letting go of everything that came before. He's decided, as the person he is now, he's going to enjoy this world fully, starting with breakfast downstairs. The inn serves steak in the morning, and the portions are enormous. He makes a mental note to thank Gortio, because this place is excellent. He sits with his food and maps out his priorities. He needs income, and he's in a dungeon town, so the dungeon is the obvious short-term answer. Before he gets up, he pulls up his status screen to check something he'd half noticed the night before. 2 new skills have appeared while he slept. The first is Judgment, which lets him freely assign something called STP points, though the counter sits at 0 for now. The second is Job Management, and that one stops him mid-bite. In this world, jobs are normally only changeable at specific locations, like churches. His skill lets him swap jobs freely, anytime, anywhere. He looks at the list. Villager, default. Traveler, from all the walking. Cook carried over from his previous life because apparently that transfers. Merchant and carrier, unlocked through his unique skills. Then 2 special ones at the bottom that he stares at for a long moment. Avenger, reincarnated hero. He knocks his forehead against the table. Of course, he isn't getting revenge on anyone, becoming a hero, or blowing his cover by using a job title that reveals what he is to anyone with appraisal skills. He keeps those hidden. He'll stick with villager and traveler, pick up combat-oriented jobs as he levels, and stay low profile. He finishes his meal, impressing the cook since most guests leave half their plate, then asks where to shop. He heads into the city with his bags and finds the streets as lively as expected. A dungeon town runs on a distinct economy, visible in its dense clusters of shops. Daily goods, weapons, and ingredients all packed together. The largest shop belongs to a trading company, a massive building that feels like a market under one roof. He goes in to stock up on essentials, spare clothes, socks, backup weapons, armor, and potions. As he stands in the middle of the floor, calculating what he still needs, a familiar voice calls his name. Gortio has spotted him from across the shop and waves him over, genuinely pleased to see him again so soon. Toy explains he's trying to get ready to explore the dungeon solo but is still working out the details. Gortio thinks about it, then asks if he has a moment, and leads him toward a staircase heading down. He tells Toy as they descend that this is where the company handles its contracted workers. Toy stops walking and tells him directly that he isn't buying a slave. Full stop. Gortio says he understands completely, but he brought him here because he genuinely believes it's a better option than risking his life alone underground with no one watching his back. He presses his case gently, pointing out that some of the contracted workers down here have real dungeon experience, and that a magic contract makes betrayal literally impossible. If money can buy safety, he considers that a fair trade. He asks what Toy thinks. Even just looking around might help him get a feel for things. Toy turns it over and agrees that looking can't hurt. He's uneasy about the whole thing. Buying someone's life with money sits wrong with him in a way he can't fully shake, but he's also heard that for some people and their families, being contracted like this is how they survive. Framed as another kind of employment, maybe it isn't entirely awful. He still has the coin Gortio gave him, and hiring someone while he can afford it doesn't seem like the worst idea. He steels himself and steps further in. Immediately, two women call out to him, one cooing that he's cute, the other offering company for the night with a grin that makes him step back. Gortio smiles and casually notes that slaves for that purpose are expensive and well outside his budget, then guides him toward the section for dungeon companions instead. Toy looks around more carefully this time, using appraisal on a few of them. He's surprised to see even former priests among them. Gortio explains that most are low-tier explorers with job levels still in the single digits, but even that makes them more reliable than a complete beginner going in blind. If he wants someone more experienced, the Adventurers Guild is worth checking. Toy thinks about his setup. If he's going to be the frontliner, what he really needs in a second slot is either a heavy warrior or a healer. He tells Gortio he isn't quite sold yet, and that a 2 million coin purchase isn't a decision he's making lightly. Then, something occurs to him. He asks if Gortio happens to have any mages available. Gortio tells him mages are rare enough that they almost never end up as contracted workers, and among those he can genuinely recommend, there are none. Toy catches the phrasing and asks if that means there are some he can't recommend. Gortio admits that yes, among those convicted of serious crimes, there's technically one mage on the floor. Toy braces himself. A mage with a criminal record sounds like either a fascinating story or an immediate problem. Gortio tells him it isn't danger that makes her hard to place, but something else entirely, and that almost no one at this branch has been willing to buy her. Toy stares at him and firmly tells himself not to get carried away imagining a slow burn story where a troubled mage becomes his loyal companion. Gortio leads him over anyway. The issue, he clarifies, is that the mage is an elderly woman over 300 years old, making her physically unsuitable for manual labor. Toy looks at her, and his expression softens despite himself. Gortio continues, her magic research went catastrophically wrong and caused an explosion that leveled the surrounding area. She insists it was an accident, and nothing about her suggests otherwise, but damage is damage, and she still has a 100-year sentence left. She has some elven blood, which slows her aging, but the law states she will be sent to forced labor in the mines the next morning. Toy looks at her properly. He doesn't say it out loud, but someone that age in a mine isn't going to last more than a few days. He lets out a slow breath and asks Gortio if he can speak with her for a moment. Gortio says he doesn't mind, but asks if Toy is certain. He crouches down, introduces himself, and asks the woman her name. Her voice comes out thin and trembling. Anne. Toy asks her quietly if there's anywhere she wants to go. Anne says that if it's possible, she'd have liked to visit the dungeon one more time. Toy is quiet for a second. Then he pulls out his coin pouch and tells Gortio he's buying her. He knows full well what he's doing is mostly for his own peace of mind. It isn't going to fix anything larger than this one moment. But he carefully lifts Anne onto his back and carries her out. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembers doing something similar before, carrying his grandmother on his back to the hospital when things had gotten bad. Gortio walks beside him and asks if he's truly sure about this, reminding him that the contract carries a full legal obligation to care for Anne with no exceptions. Toy smiles awkwardly and keeps walking. Back at the inn, he thinks it over honestly. Buying a contracted worker on day 2 of his reincarnation, especially an elderly woman, is objectively reckless. But the decision is already made, and he isn't the type to dwell on what he can't undo. He still has enough funds to manage, and the inn allows contracted workers for a small extra fee, so the practical side is covered. He settles Anne into the bed and decides he'll take the floor for the night. Then he reconsiders almost immediately and decides they can just share the bed. There's nothing strange about it. He isn't leaving an old woman sleeping alone on a cold mattress. What he doesn't know yet, settling down beside her in the dark, is that the frail old woman he just carried home is anything but ordinary. He has no idea what he's just brought into his life. Toy jolts awake on the floor to find Anne's face, hovering right above his in the early morning quiet. His heart nearly leaps out through his throat. Anne only smiles and apologizes softly for taking the bed for herself. Toy waves it off. He asks how she's feeling. She says she's never felt more rested in her life. That's more than he'd dared hope for. Then a rumble rolls through the room that has nothing to do with the floorboards. He's on his feet before the echo even fades. Downstairs, the meal arrives in portions built for someone twice their size. She clears her plate before Toy has even finished registering his own. He flags down the server. He quietly orders a meat dish. He watches her eat like a woman half her apparent age. He quietly revises every assumption he'd made about frail old women. He tries calling her grandma out of habit. He gets corrected at once. He tries Annalisa San next. She tells him to drop the honorifics and call her Anne. With name settled, Toy asks if she actually has dungeon experience. She replies she does. She tells him to ask whatever he likes. He activates his appraisal. The result comes back plainly. Level 21 mage. The woman who could barely stand the day before is now finishing a second plate of food. She sits with the calm of someone completely at home in her own skin. Her stats make him look like a rough draft by comparison, but it's what follows over the next few hours that turns out to matter more than any number could. Anne walks him through starter gear, trap awareness, and guild registration. She shows him how to convert reward cards into coin at the government office. By the time they step into the Adventurers Guild Tavern, Toy feels like a different person. He's a far cry from the one who woke up in a forest 2 days earlier. He notices the room runs almost entirely on melee fighters. Barely an archer is in sight. Anne shares without being asked that arrows burn through earnings too fast for working adventurers. The wealthy types who can afford bows, she adds, have little real interest in dungeon work to begin with. Most parties settle around 5 or 6 members. That's the balance point between strength and a fair split of the reward. Toy asks whether going solo is genuinely reckless. She answers without hesitation that it is. A scout is the bare minimum, she says. Beginners have died on the first floor from traps they never even saw coming. He sits with that for a moment. He turns the problem over. Joining an existing party would solve things practically, but it would also put eyes on him. It would invite questions he isn't ready to answer. He's trying hard to stay invisible. Anne reads the silence with uncomfortable accuracy. She tells him that as long as she's there, he'll be covered. She can sense both traps and monsters through magic. He asks if she's serious. She simply says she is. Impressed, despite himself, he gently points out that bringing an old woman into a dungeon might still be more risky than either of them should take on. Maybe it's better if she waits at the inn. Anne meets his eyes instead. She wishes to come along. If she slows him down, she says, he can leave her behind with no hard feelings. She only wants to see a dungeon one more time. He holds her gaze, exhales, and gives in. They agree to go together. The next morning, Toy takes in the dungeon entrance properly for the first time. It's wider and better lit than he expected. It feels less like a cave and more like a space that bends slightly outside the normal rules of the world. Its paths branch and loop toward a boss room. He tells Annalise to move at her own pace and leave the fighting to him. He focuses. His gear snaps into place in a single instant. It startles her enough that she demands to know what just happened. He explains the item box's quick equip function. She asks, half serious, whether he's some rare porter-class traveler. He answers that he isn't exactly, more that he was simply born with it. Her eyes drop to the sword at his hip. She asks carefully whether that's mithril. He asks if she recognizes it. She calls it a genuinely extraordinary blade. Then she leans back with the peaceful look of someone whose affairs are finally in order. She murmurs that she can die in peace now. That earns her a firm reminder from Toy that dying isn't on the schedule. She laughs it off as simply being startled by her own words. More practically, she adds that both the skill and the sword are rare enough to draw serious attention. He'd be wise to keep them out of sight, she says. He nods and faces forward just as a monster rounds the corner. He admits out loud that he wasn't mentally ready for it. He swings anyway and splits it clean in one strike. A drop item clatters to the floor beside it. The sword may not be the fastest blade around. On this floor, it doesn't need to be. One good hit closes every fight before it really starts. He tells Annalise to hang back and call out anything useful as they move. She agrees. Moments later, 2 more creatures appear at once. Before he can even decide which to take first, she steps forward and drops both with a clean burst of fire magic. He's left staring at her. She notes, almost casually, that at level 21, the first floor offers no real resistance, adding she has a solid grounding in swordsmanship and will point out anything he's doing wrong. Toy looks at this small, white-haired woman who'd seemed half a step from death only 2 days before. He feels something settle into place. Bringing her along might be the sharpest decision he's made since arriving in this world. He has no idea yet how true that's about to become. Back in the royal capital, Princess Elmelda watches the summoned group divide itself naturally. 14 of them head straight for the dungeon. Akaba's impatience drags 3 more along behind him. The rest choose to stay and begin structured lessons and combat training instead. Sakuya from that second group calls after Akaba, hoping they'll at least prepare first. He turns on her at once, telling her to stop hovering and brushing her off with a jab about chemistry clubs. A few others laugh along, saying she sounds like she never left school. The dungeon group insists that's where the real action is. The princess turns to Itsuki, the one named the Blue Sea Hero, and asks if he's ready. He replies that moving without understanding your own limits is a reliable way to fail, and he'd rather know exactly what he's working with before acting. That only earns him a grin and a jab of cowardice from Akaba on his way out the door. Watching him go, the princess feels the full weight of the situation settle onto her shoulders. Itsuki carries himself like someone who holds things together back in his own world, and the people who stay behind with him seem more level-headed, giving her something solid to build on. Akaba is an entirely different matter. His record lists assault, extortion, and arson. Nothing in his manner suggests those entries are exaggerated. He shows no real concern for anyone's well-being, including his own allies. His warrior-class job means the lower floors will offer him no resistance at all, not before the real danger even begins. The summoning itself was a national undertaking, announced and funded across the whole kingdom. There's no room here for failure to be acceptable. She tells Itsuki that the royal dungeon is considered harder than most, and that there's no virtue in rushing. Knowing when to retreat is its own form of strength. He takes it in without argument but replies with a sarcastic remark. Deeper in another dungeon entirely, Toy is laughing at something Annalise just said. Above them, perched in the branches at the dungeon's edge, the goddess watches the different threads of the story play out below her. She murmurs that everyone seems to have their own way of getting on with things, and hopes they all manage it. Several days have passed since Toy and Anne first ventured into the dungeon together. The pair quickly settle into a rhythm that works surprisingly well. For the first few days, they stick to the first floor, fighting rat-type monsters while Toy sharpens his combat skills and steadily gains levels. The battles remain manageable, though he's honest enough to admit that Anne's mana-sensing support does a lot of the work. Defeated monsters dissolve and leave only loot behind. Every now and then, a rare drop appears, making the whole process feel genuinely rewarding rather than just necessary. Anne keeps pace without complaint despite the physical toll it clearly takes. Toy casually stops so she can rest. Back at the inn that evening, Toy brings up something he has been sitting on. He tells Anne that he can switch his own class without visiting a temple. Anne goes so still mid-chew that Toy briefly wonders if he has broken her. After a moment, she sets down her fork, carefully wipes her mouth, and says that what Toy just described would cost a fortune at any temple and isn't something a person can normally do alone. Toy explains that his appraisal skill seems to have an extra function that makes it possible. Anne stares into the distance for a moment as if her understanding of the world has just shifted, then snaps back and demands to know how many unique skills he actually has. Between the sword, the item box, appraisal, and now this, there's no way he's an ordinary traveler. Toy tells her to calm down and promises to explain everything eventually. For now, he wants to discuss changing classes before they challenge the first floor boss. A new class called Explorer has appeared in his list, offering abilities related to dungeon movement and treasure detection. Anne immediately perks up. Explorer is a high-level support class, she explains. Few people choose it because it lacks offensive power, but its utility skills are excellent and it levels quickly inside dungeons. For someone like Toy, it's an ideal fit. The next morning, Toy switches to Explorer. His appearance changes slightly with the class change. Anne calls it cute. Toy chooses not to respond. Toy tests the dungeon move ability on a nearby wall. A door appears out of solid stone. When he opens it, they instantly arrive at the furthest point they reached on their previous run, skipping the entire journey in between. He stares at the door in disbelief. Anne explains that it can connect to any place they've already visited and disappears after a single use. The mana cost is noticeable but manageable, and the amount of time it saves is incredible, especially for someone like her. Toy is still processing the fact that he's effectively gained a teleportation ability on his third day of dungeon exploration when he turns and finds Anne face down on the floor. He rushes over and calls her name. Looking slightly embarrassed, she sits up and explains that the back-to-back surprises made her briefly forget how breathing works. Then, in a tone that leaves no room for argument, she tells him never to show either the class change or the door ability to anyone else. Toy agrees immediately. As they're preparing to leave for the day, Anne grows unusually quiet. Noticing it, Toy asks what's on her mind. After a brief hesitation, she carefully asks whether he might be one of the summoned heroes. Toy's expression becomes difficult to read. He asks why she thinks so. Anne reasons that she spent time as a slave in the royal capital and overheard talk of a large-scale hero summoning. Someone possessing multiple unique skills, each rare enough to appear in perhaps one person out of tens of thousands, is difficult to explain any other way. Then she stops herself and tells him to forget the question. Whatever he is, he still approached a discarded old woman, bought her freedom, carried her into a dungeon, and gave her a reason to live again. That much won't change. She intends to repay that kindness for as long as she has left. Toy opens his mouth to answer, then suddenly freezes. One of his new skills is reacting to something nearby. His treasure search ability keeps drawing his attention to the wall on their left. Anne checks it with mana sense and finds nothing. No hidden doors, no magical traces. Toy knocks on the stone and wonders if it can simply be broken. Anne tells him to step back. Then she delivers a mana-enhanced punch that shatters part of the wall with surprising ease. Behind it is a small hidden chamber. Inside the chamber sits a chest expensive enough to suggest its contents are anything but ordinary. Anne identifies it as a high-ranking chest, the kind that almost never turns up on a first floor. Mana, sensing, finds no traps, though she warns that physical hazards like poison needles wouldn't register anyway. Toy says he's got it handled and opens the chest himself, drawn by the odd feeling that it had been waiting for him specifically. Inside sits a single small, transparent bottle. Toy lifts it up. He runs his appraisal on it, and the value that comes back stops every thought in his head. A solution potion, worth over 100 million gold. Anne sees it and crumples straight to the floor for the second time that day. Once upright again, she explains through tears that finding this potion was the entire reason she wanted to return to the dungeon. After her body deteriorated, she could no longer explore properly, and her attempt to recreate the potion through research was what caused the explosion that ended her old life as she knew it. Toy looks at her and says that now they've found one, so they can use it. Anne stops him. A potion that rarely surfaces on the open market maybe once a decade. The sensible choice is to sell it to Gortio and use the funds to secure every advantage Toy might need going forward. Simply knowing the potion exists has already given her more hope than she's carried in years. That alone is enough. She adds, with quiet firmness, that something this valuable should never be wasted on a low-ranking contracted worker, and that Toy should think this through practically. Toy says he's heard her clearly, so he's not selling it. Before she can get out another word, he uncorks the bottle and pours its contents over her. Anne barely manages half a protest before her body seizes with the force of the reaction. She trembles hard enough that Toy instinctively catches her, startled by how scorching her skin has become. Gradually, the trembling eases. The light fades. Toy looks down at the person in his arms, and his brain takes a full second to catch up with what his eyes are seeing. The white hair and the wrinkles are gone. Cradled against him is a woman who looks no older than her mid-20s, with a face that belongs in an entirely different category of existence from anything Toy expected to find hidden inside a first-floor dungeon chamber. He turns away immediately and brings up the matter of clothing. A beat later, Anne arrives at the same realization. Clutching the remains of her now dramatically oversized outfit, she hurriedly apologizes with the expression of someone who has just remembered that dignity exists. Toy fixes his gaze on the wall and tells himself he'd suspected something like this might happen. He just hadn't expected quite this degree of it. Opening a door in the wall with his dungeon move, he leads them back to their inn room. There, he pauses in the doorway as a new realization settles over him. He's now sharing a room indefinitely with what might be the most striking woman he's ever seen. She's also his contracted companion. And, apparently, this is simply his life now. 2 weeks after Sayaka arrived in the New World, she discovers that her assigned profession is alchemist, a crafting-focused class. Alongside apothecaries, blacksmiths, and tailors, she spends her days in the workshop creating equipment and supplies for dungeon explorers. While combat-focused students and the hero of the sea undergo training and evaluations before entering the dungeon, she gradually accepts that her role lies behind the front lines. Elsewhere, the dungeon expeditions continue to struggle. Akaba's party pushes ahead but quickly falls into disorder due to poor teamwork and constant arguments. Their slow progress leads to an ambush. They survive, but tensions only worsen afterward. News of another retreat disappoints the princess, though she's relieved that no one was killed. At least the group knows when to withdraw before things become truly dangerous. Meanwhile, Sayaka pushes herself relentlessly in the workshop until Konomi notices her exhaustion. The conversation soon turns toward Toy, whose absence continues to weigh on her mind. Sayaka still isn't sure whether Toy was summoned alongside the others, but she can't shake the feeling that he's somewhere in this world. Remembering the help he once gave her, she becomes determined to find him and repay that kindness. What began as simple concern has grown into something more personal, a wish she knows may be selfish but cannot abandon. Far to the southeast of the royal capital, in the city of Kernify, excitement spreads through the Adventurers Guild as rumors circulate about a top-ranked treasure chest discovered on the dungeon's first floor. The story sparks envy and speculation among adventurers, many lamenting the incredible luck of the unknown person who found it. Since neither the discoverer nor the reward must be revealed, the mystery only fuels more gossip. Unaware of the commotion elsewhere, Toy rests peacefully until a sudden shock jolts him awake. For a brief moment, he wonders if everything that happened the previous night was nothing more than a bizarre dream. That thought vanishes as soon as he notices Annalise sleeping nearby. The former elderly woman now looks like a young adult, leaving no room for doubt. Thinking back on the previous night, Toy understands why Annalise had broken down so completely. After years of living under the constant shadow of death, suddenly regaining her youth shattered every wall she'd built around herself. The relief overwhelmed her, leaving her sobbing until exhaustion finally won out. Since she refused to let go of him, Toy stayed by her side, helped her clean up, and remained with her until she fell asleep. Remembering it leaves him slightly embarrassed, but he quickly pushes the thought aside and prepares for the day ahead. After waking Annalise, the two head downstairs for breakfast before planning a trip into town. As soon as she realizes her youthful body is still real, guilt returns. The potion that broke her curse feels far too valuable for someone like her to ever repay. As usual, Toy dismisses the concern. To him, the situation is simple. The potion was available when it was needed. Annalise survived, and everyone benefited. There's no point dwelling on debts. Breakfast brings another surprise. What Toy initially assumes is an effort to rebuild lost strength turns out to be Annalise's normal appetite. Watching her work through meal after meal makes it obvious that she simply loves food. Toy finds the sight oddly amusing. The mystery solves itself once he notices the impressive physical condition hidden beneath her frame. Suddenly, the amount she eats makes perfect sense. Afterward, they buy equipment and clothing. Annalise adapts to her new appearance with remarkable ease. Despite her youthful face, the calm and dependable air around her remains unchanged, making her seem more like a reliable older sister than a former old woman. With preparations complete, they enter the dungeon. Toy expects Annalise to be capable, but seeing her in action is another matter entirely. Monsters fall with ease, and every movement is polished and efficient. Freed from the limits of her aged body, she can once again use her strength, agility, and magic at levels she hasn't reached in years. Toy finally sees just how skilled she is when a distant trap triggers unexpectedly. Before he can react, she catches a flying arrow in one smooth motion. Learning that she once specialized in spear combat only deepens his amazement. Until now, he'd assumed her vast knowledge came mainly from age and experience. The truth is far more impressive. Despite being only 18 when her career was interrupted, she had already reached an extraordinary level through relentless effort and dedication. Rather than discouraging him, learning that ignites his competitive spirit, he doesn't see an unreachable genius. He sees someone worth chasing. His first major goal becomes simple: catch up to Annalise. Deeper in the dungeon, they eventually reach the floor boss chamber. Though nervous, Toy decides to face the monster alone while keeping Annalise in reserve. The battle quickly proves difficult. The greater rat's massive body hides surprising speed, allowing it to dodge attacks and strike back whenever an opening appears. Fortunately, sturdy equipment and a healthy stockpile of potions let Toy endure long enough to study its behavior. As the fight continues, he begins noticing patterns in its movements. Dungeon monsters are magical constructs, and their actions follow predictable sequences. Once he identifies the pattern, he waits patiently for the opportunity he needs. When it comes, he drives his blade straight into the creature's forehead. The impact sends him crashing backward, but the attack succeeds. After a grueling struggle, the boss collapses. Toy can't help grinning as rewards scatter across the floor and a brilliant glow announces his advancement to Explorer Level 4. He even unlocks a new class. More than that, though, he finds himself captivated by dungeon exploration itself. No game from his old world ever delivered this level of immersion, tension, or satisfaction. Wanting to keep the momentum going, he experiments with Dungeon Move and soon discovers something remarkable. By returning to the area before the boss room through a hidden route rather than the designated exit, he effectively resets the encounter. What follows is an intense cycle of repeated battles. Again and again, Toy challenges the floor boss, gathering experience, materials, and valuable drops at an incredible pace. Hours pass before exhaustion finally catches up to him. By the end of the session, he has completed more than 10 runs, burned through nearly all his potions, and pushed himself to his limits. All that effort pays off. By the end of it, his Explorer class has reached level 6. Even Annalise looks impressed by how creatively he uses his abilities despite his lack of experience. Toy credits years of reading novels and playing games in his old world, though he privately hopes he can keep growing without burning through too many years of his own life along the way. Once their dungeon run is over, they sell their materials and leave with a respectable amount of money. As they walk through town, Annalise suddenly takes hold of Toy's hand and suggests celebrating the end of her curse with a proper dinner. At first, the suggestion seems harmless enough. Then Annalise quietly reveals something she's noticed. Ever since they left Gale, someone has been following them from the shadows. A chill runs down Toy's spine. Afterward, the two return to the inn, but the uneasy feeling that followed them all day refuses to fade. Annalise confirms her suspicions through magic detection, revealing that 3 individuals have been tailing them for some time. The news puts Toy on edge at once. For a brief moment, his thoughts race toward the possibility of someone uncovering the truth about his reincarnation, but Annalise quickly dismisses that concern. Based on their behavior, the pursuers don't resemble guild personnel or city guards. The fact that they keep watching from a distance rather than approaching openly strongly suggests common criminals. Not wanting to reveal where they're staying, the pair decide to shake their followers by blending into a crowded area. While buying grilled squid from a street stall, Toy secretly uses appraisal and finally identifies the suspicious figures. Bandits. Once they're certain they're no longer being watched, the two retreat to safety and settle into their room for the evening. Although the immediate danger seems to have passed, the mystery of why they're being targeted continues to linger. Toy struggles to think of any reason someone would single him out. At first, he wonders if word somehow spread about the rare treasure chest he found, but Annalise dismisses the idea. If anyone had been secretly watching them at the time, her detection magic would have caught it. As they keep talking through possibilities, another explanation comes to mind. During his journey, Toy had stumbled across a bandit attack targeting a shipment of Goltio. He joined forces with the guards to repel the attackers and, in the chaos of battle, personally defeated the bandit leader. Since most of the gang appeared to be wiped out afterward, he naturally assumed the matter was finished. That assumption may have been wrong. If even a handful of survivors escaped, they could easily have traced the failed operation back to him. Annalise goes on to explain that the situation may be worse than simple revenge. The bandits likely belong to the Shirinza gang, a powerful criminal organization whose influence stretches throughout the city. Their operations include robbery, raids, assassinations, and the trafficking of stolen goods, giving them a reach far beyond ordinary outlaws. Toy quickly realizes they're essentially this world's version of a mafia syndicate. Rather than simply holding a grudge over a failed raid, the organization likely views anyone who interferes with its interests as an enemy. Through bribery, intimidation, and corruption, the gang extends its influence into countless corners of society. If they truly have their eyes on him, gathering information through guild contacts wouldn't be difficult. The thought leaves Toy deeply frustrated. The whole situation feels absurdly unfair, especially when all he did was help innocent people. Annalise explains that reality is rarely so simple. Although the city's lord is known for being strict toward crime, keeping order has grown increasingly difficult. The dungeon draws dreamers, adventurers, drifters, and fortune seekers from every direction, creating the perfect breeding ground for criminal groups. Many people turn to illegal work simply to survive, while others sell information or favors for quick money. Hearing this, Toy starts to wonder whether even the city guards can be fully trusted. If corruption runs that deep, their position may be far more dangerous than he originally believed. Regret briefly creeps into his thoughts as he questions whether acting on impulse has once again brought trouble on himself. Before those doubts can take root, Annalise gently reassures him. What he did wasn't a mistake. He protected the shipment, saved innocent lives, and acted on his conscience. More importantly, had he chosen to ignore the attack, their paths might never have crossed. From Annalise's perspective, that alone makes everything worthwhile. Toy is left speechless by Annalise's confidence. Far from intimidated by the possibility of hostile pursuers, she treats the situation as little more than an inconvenience. In her eyes, bandits aren't especially dangerous as long as their numbers are properly watched. Since the bandit class is merely a profession picked up through criminal activity rather than real training, its users rarely possess remarkable ability. Their greatest strength comes from numbers, which is exactly why experienced adventurers learn to handle them. The simplest path to safety, she says, is becoming stronger. As long as they keep exploring dungeons and improving themselves, there's little reason to live in fear. Listening to her practical outlook, Toy can't help thinking Annalise is surprisingly straightforward, almost a little muscle-headed, despite her intelligence. Before he can dwell on it further, his stomach loudly reminds him of a more pressing concern. The grilled squid stored in his item box is still perfectly warm, so the two decide to enjoy dinner in their room. As they eat together, Toy gradually lets go of his worries. Imagining worst-case scenarios constantly will only ruin his new life. If he lets every threat frighten him, he'll never get to enjoy what this world has to offer. The next morning arrives peacefully. Toy notices Annalise looking slightly tired and soon learns she spent part of the night standing watch. Fortunately, nothing suspicious occurred, confirming that changing inns isn't necessary. Reassured by the quiet night, the pair head toward the dungeon district. On arrival, Toy is surprised to find the whole area overflowing with energy. Food stalls line the streets, merchants call out their goods, and crowds fill the plaza, giving the place more the feel of a festival than an adventurer's gathering. Annalise explains that the excitement comes from the monthly dungeon renewal that happens during the new moon. Once the layout changes, adventurers rush in to remap the floors and hunt for newly spawned treasure chests, and merchants naturally follow the crowds, turning the occasion into a lively monthly market. Curious, Toy browses the stalls and eventually spots a small accessory that catches his eye. Using detailed appraisal, he identifies a pair of magical earrings that boost magical power and immediately decides they'd suit Annalise perfectly. Once worn, they complement her appearance surprisingly well, making her seem even more refined than before. Annalise is genuinely pleased with the gift, though Toy quickly convinces himself there's nothing special about it. Just a practical purchase, he tells himself, nothing more. Unfortunately for him, things get more complicated when Annalise insists on choosing something for him in return. After nearly 20 minutes of careful thought, she settles on a mysterious necklace. Even Toy's appraisal struggles to fully identify it, which suggests either the item's quality is unusually high or his current level simply isn't enough. Since it shows no obvious downside, he decides to wear it anyway. Not long after, the pair draw attention from nearby adventurers. They stand out enough that a pair of young men boldly approach, hoping to form a party. The encounter ends almost immediately once Annalise fixes them with a cold stare powerful enough to send them retreating in a panic. Once they've escaped the awkward moment, the two end up laughing about it while taking shelter from the crowd. Toy insists Annalise is far too beautiful not to draw attention, while she casually counters that he's the cute one. With no sign of the bandits from the day before, they're free to focus entirely on dungeon exploration. With that distraction gone, Toy decides it's finally time to test the new class he unlocked after repeatedly defeating the floor boss. The moment he switches, Annalise's reaction makes it clear something extraordinary has happened. The class is called Hero of the Great Squad, a title that immediately grabs her attention. Hero and Saint classes, she explains, are legendary professions rarely seen even among history's greatest figures. They're often associated with people whose names survive in stories and legends. Curious, Toy examines the class himself and is stunned by what he finds. Even at level 1, its base stats far surpass those of ordinary classes. On top of that, it comes with powerful support abilities, passive bonuses, and automatic health regeneration. One skill in particular, Commando, steadily strengthens nearby allies, making it exceptionally valuable in group combat. The sheer potential leaves both of them amazed. What first seemed like a lucky reward is starting to look like something much bigger. Toy eagerly tests his new abilities and quickly discovers just how extraordinary the class really is. The moment he activates Buster Slash, a blade of energy tears through the air and obliterates everything in its path. The technique requires charging and leaves a noticeable opening afterward, making it risky to use carelessly in close combat. Even so, the sheer power and spectacle leave him thoroughly impressed. More than anything, it just looks incredible. Excited by the possibilities, he decides to spend the day pushing deeper into the dungeon. Since the area around the first floor boss is probably crowded with adventurers by now, he and Annalise continue to the second floor instead. At first glance, the new floor looks much like the first. Then Toy notices actual trees growing inside the dungeon. The strange landscape almost feels natural until monsters begin emerging from the vegetation. Gray rats roam alongside wooden golems, a combination that could easily overwhelm careless adventurers. Fortunately, the slow-moving golems pose little threat to him now. He splits one in half with a single swing and quickly realizes the second floor is proving just as manageable as the first. As victory follows victory, his confidence in the Hero of the Great Squad class only grows. Combined with its weapon proficiency bonuses, his swordsmanship feels smoother and stronger than ever. The class seems almost designed for a greatsword user. Encouraged by his progress, he decides there's no reason to stop and sets his sights on the second floor boss. The fight is noticeably tougher than the previous one. The enormous rat has a much wider attack range and enough mobility to punish careless advances. Rather than rushing in, Toy studies its movements and adjusts his approach. When an opening finally appears, he unleashes Buster Slash. The compressed wave of energy tears through the monster, reducing it to pieces before it can recover. Compared to the faster rat-type enemies, the slower golem-like foes make ideal targets for the technique. Before long, the second floor boss falls, earning him another solo victory. After a short rest, they repeat the fight several more times to gather extra experience and rewards. Eventually, adventurers begin filling the floor. Realizing their efficient farming method will attract attention if they continue, Toy decides it's time to stop. Annalise can't help admiring how effective Dungeon Move has been. In all her years of adventuring, she's never experienced a more efficient dungeon run. Most adventurers spend a huge portion of their day simply traveling. Once travel time is factored in, many parties turn back around the second floor boss. Going deeper usually requires camping underground, carrying extra supplies, and moving at a slower pace. Veteran adventurers often hire porters and remain in the dungeon for days to maximize profits. The conversation eventually drifts toward a question Toy has been wondering about. Since there's no visible sun underground, how do people keep track of time inside a dungeon? To his astonishment, Annalise casually admits she mostly relies on experience and her sense of hunger. The answer leaves him wondering whether she measures time entirely through her stomach. Amusing as that is, both agree they've already made remarkable progress for a single day. Clearing the second floor and defeating its boss multiple times is more than enough for one outing. When they finally leave the dungeon, evening has already fallen. Toy's satisfaction doesn't last long. Almost immediately, he senses something is wrong. Annalise confirms it. Several suspicious figures are lingering near the dungeon entrance, clearly keeping watch. Not wanting to draw attention, the pair avoid both the Adventurers Guild and their usual route through town. As they make their way elsewhere, frustration begins to build in Toy. After finally getting a second chance at life, he now faces the possibility of living under a cloud of fear all over again. The more he thinks about it, the more ridiculous it feels. Their pursuers aren't particularly strong. With his current abilities, especially the hero class and his two-handed sword, defeating them would probably be easy, but solving every problem through force would only create bigger problems later. Sensing his irritation, Annalise calmly reminds him of the advantages they already possess. Between appraisal and magic detection, avoiding ambushes is relatively simple. Even if trouble does find them, they're stronger than the people hunting them. Her words gradually ease his worries, but she raises another concern. Being only two people leaves them exposed. A few trustworthy allies would make future situations much safer. Toy briefly considers possible candidates, but the reliable bodyguards he once knew have already returned to the royal capital. With no obvious options remaining, Annalise suggests hiring help. Their adventuring profits have been steadily increasing, and bringing on a fighter, or even purchasing a combat slave, has become financially realistic. Toy feels uneasy about the idea of owning a slave, but he can't deny the practical value of having another capable person around. In the end, he decides they should at least look into their options the following day. While the two continue mapping out their next move, events elsewhere are already turning against them. Deep within the slums of the Western District, a woman lounges comfortably while taking reports from her subordinates. The surveillance around Toy has tightened, and every movement in and out of the Adventurers Guild is being carefully tracked. Dissatisfied with the lack of progress, she violently punishes one of her underlings before demanding results. Her patience is running thin, and she wants the girl Toy brought before her as soon as possible. The woman orchestrating the hunt is none other than Shardina, the feared leader of the thieves.
Here I am.